Imagine this. The best pasta sauce you have ever tasted sits abandoned on a plate. Wasted sauce. That is a tragedy. If only you had used Barilla al Bronzo pasta. Its bronze-cut texture holds your sauce and scoops up every last drop. The Italians call that scarpetta. Capture sauce the Italian way. Barilla al Bronzo. Click or tap the banner to find out more.
Choice Hotels gets you more for your money so you can maximize any road trip. Like these road trippers making waffles and eating fresh fruit in their natural habitat. The breakfast area at a Comfort Inn. I just love seeing a vacation maximized in the wild. Check into more. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and those who don't identify as either, you are listening to a bonus episode of Ratchet and Respectable. As you are well aware, I've been covering the Diddy Trial since day one. I think we're on, is it day 23, day 24? I haven't even looked at the testimony from today, Monday, 5 p.m. is when I'm recording this opening. I've spent a lot of time talking about what's RICO and what's not RICO. I've referred back to the grand jury indictment. I told you what I've read or watched other lawyers say to get a sense of the trial. And I thought, you know what? I should probably actually talk to a lawyer at some point. Funny enough, I was trying to figure out who to interview. I had my feelers out to a few people, and one of my friends hit me out the blue. And I was like, hey, what you doing? So the friend that reached out is Kim Foxx. If you live in the Chicagoland area, then you know exactly who she is. If you follow the R. Kelly trial or the Jussie Smollett debacle, then you know who Kim Foxx is. Her official title is, now, the former Cook County State's Attorney. She is the first Black woman to lead that state's attorney's office, which is also the second largest prosecutor's office in the country. So you can imagine that she has really, really good insight when it comes to high-level prosecutions. So I asked Kim if she would come on the podcast, because I ask everyone. I reach out to all sorts of people, and some of them tell me yes, and some of them tell me no. A lot of people are afraid to speak, especially those in the music industry or even music industry adjacent, even if they haven't worked in the industry for years and years and years. But I asked Kim, and she was like, sure, what do you want to know? And I was like, I want to know everything. Every major legal question that I've had about this case thus far, I asked Kim, and she answered. So without further ado, please welcome the Kim Foxx to Ratchet and Respectable. Hello.
Good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever folks are.
Where are you?
I am home in Chicago.
So you've been gallivanting. That's why I asked. Last time I saw you, we were both in South Africa.
Yes, you got me over to Cape Town after all of your adventures. But no, I'm back home in Chicago.
Wonderful. I'm so glad that you hit me the other day. I think I've told you this before. Even though I met you in your capacity as Cook County State's Attorney, I don't think of you in my head as lawyer Kim. You're my friend Kim, not by your job, even though I met you because of what you did. Do you remember how we met?
Oh, I remember vividly how we met.
Do you want to tell the story or should I?
You tell the story, because there are two different vantage points to the story. So your vantage point is interesting. So you start.
I was at Leading Women to Find, and R. Kelly was doing an interview on Gayle King. And I got up at the crack of dawn to watch the interview, and I'd been following along the whole thing. And so I get to breakfast, and it's not a lot of people there. And there was a very nice woman. She was sitting there, and I didn't want to go sit somewhere random away from everyone, because the whole point is to network. And I was like, hey, how are you? And we started talking. And then I don't know if it was something you said, your voice, your cadence or something like that. And oh, what are you doing up at this hour? And I was like, oh, R. Kelly. And you were like, oh, me too. And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, aren't you the lady that's all over the TV?
Yeah.
Because you're prosecuting the case.
I was the prosecutor, and I had gone undetected down at Leading Women to Find. There's so many incredible women with various professions and the like. And then there's me, public servant, I was doing a panel, but assuming that no one knew who I was. And so
I'm sorry. You did know that you were on national TV daily at that point, right?
Girl, it's me, right? And it's I was not paying attention that people would pay attention to me. And so I'm like you, I got up early because I had seen the promo that R. Kelly was going to be doing an interview with Gayle King. I was the one who brought the charges against R. Kelly in February of 2019. Those were the only charges he was facing at the time. So I knew it impacted my case. And it was stunning to me. I mean, stunning that this man pre-trial, like it was early. It was a month after he had been charged, would sit down on national television with Gayle King to talk about my charges against him. So yeah, I was up just like you were, finished watching that, came down to get some coffee and collect my thoughts. And there you were, kind enough to come sit with me and then outed me as the woman who brought the charges against R. Kelly and was trying to eat some yogurt like it hadn't happened. But yeah.
Yeah. That was 2019. And like we've like caught up with each other like all over, I was going to say the country, but now the world. We gallivanted at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a good time.
And right now on like having an adult leap year.
Yeah. I served 2 terms as Cook County State's Attorney, so the top prosecutor in Cook County, which is Chicago and the surrounding suburbs. So 8 years of, between R. Kelly and Jussie Smollett and, Black Souls Gang and all kinds of foolishness in between. Stepped down, didn't run for re-election last year to catch my breath, to breathe. It's been 25 years in public service, 20 years as a prosecutor, and I just need to see the world from a vantage point that isn't always pain and anguish.
Why are you following this Diddy trial? Because that's all this is.
It is. And it is. I'm not even going to lie. It's triggering because it is so much pain and anguish. But I am fascinated by the trial more broadly about the conversations that I'm hearing around it, right? So there's the legal aspect of it. And then there are these recurring parts of it that just strike me as a woman, as a person, as a survivor, and how we talk about survivors, how we talk about relationship imbalances. All of that has made me want to pay attention. And then I'll be perfectly honest, the internet lawyers who read, one article and all of a sudden are, Johnny Cochran is driving me insane. So I just wanted to know, like, what's happening so that we can have a clear understanding of the law and also have an honest conversation about when we see instances of sexual abuse, domestic violence, and the like, and the narratives that are formed, that we are honest in those conversations. And that's why I've been following.
If I were you, and clearly I'm not you, I would be like, I'm not anything related to law whatsoever. Like, I completely tap out. Like, I'm fully going to rest.
I should.
You should.
Like I said, I spent 2 glorious weeks gallivanting across South Africa and going on safari and the like, and being in LA and Miami and the like. So I've been kicking it. But the last 2 weeks I have been consumed.
Like the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk to you because, I watch a lot of Law and Order.
Yeah.
And I watched The Wire like all seasons, like 7 or 8 times. So like I be out here, I wouldn't say give legal analysis. I know what's RICO just based on reading the grand jury indictment.
Yeah.
What are your overall thoughts about the case thus far? Like, do you think the prosecution is making a strong case?
It's still relatively early. Based on what I've been reading, this case is going to go likely into the early weeks of July. And from what I'm seeing, they're being methodical about it. And it is, establishing each element in that indictment, right? Establishing what we call the enterprise, right? What is the enterprise? It's not just Sean Combs himself. It is the businesses that he has built and associated himself with, and the people who work for him, and the things that he has gotten them to do that are allegedly illegal. For the purposes of, maintaining his reputation, keeping him out of trouble. So watching them methodically go through the case, I think they're trying to take it element by element, but it's still early. But they need to prove, right, that the enterprise was engaging in criminal acts for furtherance of Sean Combs, like arson. So, a lot of people were caught up in the Cuddy testimony. For the salaciousness of it, I'm looking at it as the element of arson, right? That this was done, and not necessarily with Diddy's own hands, but with associates allegedly of his, for purposes of intimidation, threats, and furtherance of Sean Combs. And so that's how I'm looking at it. And so right now, I see a very methodical prosecution laying out all of their elements that, again, are subject to cross-examination. And the state, right? The state bears the burden of proving Sean Combs' guilt. He doesn't have to prove his innocence. And so that's what I'm watching is are they presenting enough to show beyond a reasonable doubt that he's guilty?
I think for me, just looking at the grand jury indictment, that I always encourage people to go back so you can actually see, like, what is actual RICO? Because I feel like people watch a lot of mob movies.
Yeah.
And they think that, like, if it's not the mob or if it's not like a gang, then it can't possibly be RICO. And as a general observation, I think people think the RICO is only sex trafficking, when it's just like you mentioned, it's arson, it's bribery, it's kidnapping, it's forced labor, it's distribution of narcotics. It's also sex trafficking.
And I think, in fairness to people who aren't familiar with the law, the RICO statutes did come out of, issues related to the mob. That is how this was birthed almost 50 years ago. That is what it was, right? To try to get to the heads of these families who were doing these things and had associates who were doing it. So yes, that association is valid, but it also extends to what we are seeing here, which is the use of his businesses for purposes of racketeering, which is using the business for illicit criminal activity.
Do you think that they've proven, let's go through them one by one, arson?
So far, the elements for arson have been demonstrated, that someone went into Kid Cudi's driveway, cut a hole, dropped a Molotov cocktail in, incinerating the car. Like, arson is the intentional starting of a fire.
They made a Molotov cocktail with a 40 ounce, which I was like, that big ass bottle?
Man, you trying to set a fire away. Like, which
kind of, but not really. And then they were like, oh, was it a really expensive scarf? It was a luxury scarf, so it didn't burn the same. And I was like, really?
That's the dichotomy here, right? Like, that it is like hood with the 40 ounce, but luxurious with the scarf. Like, it is what it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Do you think they've proven bribery?
I mean, so in this instance, you have the hotel worker who is aware of the video allegedly showing Sean Combs beating Cassie. He is made aware that this video exists. He uses his chief of staff to reach out to this man to procure the video. In doing so, offers him money in exchange for his silence, and that silence of not reporting a crime, which is a beating. And the man got paid for it. That is how we describe a bribe.
This sounds so bad. And I said it on a recent episode. I was so mad at that man for only asking for $50,000 for that. I know you can't comment on that, but I was like, that was a $500,000 minimum tape, and it really could have asked for $5 million and began the negotiations from there. But I was like, you're good at bribe.
I'm not in office. I have a take on all of it. I think when you are confronted with that, right? So you work in hotel security, side hustle from your law enforcement job. I think you are shocked. One, the contents of the video were shocking, and two, that they've reached out. That I think my man just fumbled in the gravity of it, of what more could be gotten. So like $50,000 to the average person, or $100,000 that, he was skimming from the other person he was working with, might have made sense in the moment. I bet you he had regrets that he didn't go harder, that he didn't go farther. But I think it's shocking to have someone of that magnitude find your phone number, reach out repeatedly for your assistance. And I think in the shock of it, my man lowballed himself.
By far. And I also try to keep in mind when I'm having this conversation, because he was 24 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, like, I feel like at 24, I would have had at least some fortitude. You know what? I would have called my mama.
You would want to implicate yourself to your mama? I just saw this woman get beat down on tape, and they're trying to like buy my silence. How much? Like, I feel like that's a hard conversation to have.
I'm calling my mama. If something happens, she don't know nothing, she ain't seen nothing, she just, mama got me. I felt really almost bad for him, because I'm like, you asked for, you lowballed yourself, all the way across. Like, he does the most work. He's the connect that has the negotiating power. And then he ends up with like 30,000, and the boss who did the download gets a full 50.
Yeah.
And I was like, just all the way around. But I'm also like, you got that low amount of money And then you like, okay, the whole situation's going away. And then you end up like on a federal investigation, on a federal trial all these years later, like 8 years later.
And having to sign an immunity agreement because you took a bribe. Right? So like keep in mind, like he also committed a crime.
Yeah.
He also committed a crime. So if it's just on a pure, like, keeping it gangster, if I could possibly be implicated with you and could possibly go to jail for the thing that I'm doing, you should probably get more for it.
Yeah.
The stakes are that much higher for you.
Exactly. The other thing I had with him, he got immunity to testify, but he said, very specifically, I think the prosecution, maybe it's the defense, asked him if he ever reported the money or deposited in his bank account. And he said no. And I was like, does his immunity extend to the IRS?
He has immunity from the crimes related to the bribe.
Okay.
Now, tax evasion or failure to report all of your income might be problematic for him. You have to look at the immunity agreement, but that's a good flag that you make, because the bribe piece is one piece. The not reporting the income, even if it's illegally obtained, the government wants their money, clean or dirty. They want that tax. You'd have to look at the agreement for that.
The other thing with Eddie, on cross-examination, the defense made a really big point of going through the NDA and the steps that Eddie was supposed to take that he didn't take. Like they were saying that, you were supposed to contact us if the government contacted you. You broke the NDA, then, you had to pay us like $1 million. Is that still enforceable on their end?
No. They could try it. Let me put it this way. Like they have cause to go to a judge and say, we had a contractual agreement and he has breached this agreement. One, I think you've be hard pressed to do that given the current circumstances, to be looking for your money for the bribe that you have now gotten caught soliciting. And two, at this point, because of the criminality involved, most judges would find that null.
He's a very petty man, from what I understand.
And cheap.
And girl. I was like, I understood why he's worth so much money. I'm like, because you were stiffing people across the board.
And again, talking about the furtherance of the business, right? He is a savvy businessman. How do I get the most benefit for the least amount of money? And that's what he does. That's what he does. And that's why he's so successful.
Consistently. Like I was reading something, I think it's yesterday's testimony. Jane had asked him for $15,000 to celebrate her birthday.
Yeah.
And he sent her 13 instead.
And negotiate.
And I was like, it's her birthday. And it's not like you don't have the money. Like you're just being cheap just to be cheap.
And negotiating, you're not going to catch me off of the first offer. Like, am I really a businessman if I take the first offer that's given to me, even on something like, I don't know, my woman's birthday? But that's who he is.
That he didn't show up to. And I was like, she invited you to the birthday with her friends, asked you for 15, and you lowballed her with the 13 and then also didn't show up. Like,
yeah. This testimony from Jane has been incredibly interesting in the way that he's been openly just displaying his disregard for her importance in his life.
Yes, I will get to that. I want to go through the RICO charges.
Yeah, please.
Kidnapping. Did you think Capricorn proved the kidnapping?
I think the elements of kidnapping are taking someone from one location to another against their will. That's what you have to prove, right? So, I think a lot of people watch enough TV and they're like, he didn't, blindfold her and, put some chloroform on her and like drag her out the room. You know what I mean? Pop the trunk, go in. Like that is TV kidnapping. Kidnapping can very well be like someone won't let you leave a room in your house, locks the door so that you cannot leave against your will, or take you from one place, to another. It is restraining someone against their will, moving someone against their will. The testimony that I heard from her, that she didn't want to go, that she was told that she must go, that she understood that there were guns available. All of that can be used to prove that a kidnapping occurred. It goes to her credibility. Was she a willing participant or not? Did she feel that she could say no, given everything that she knew about him and the things that she had seen? That goes to her state of mind. So, I mean, I can't say as definitively because it truly goes to her state of mind versus on the bribery charge, it's easy to prove. A check was written for your silence. You remain silent. You did that. The kidnapping one may be a more difficult one.
There was another incident that meets your definition of, or meets the definition of kidnapping. He beat Cassie in a car, and when they get to wherever they're going, she jumps out the car and tries to run away.
Yes.
He sends his security to go bring her to him.
Correct.
That sounds straight up kidnapping to me. Like, I want to leave, I can't leave. Or after she's beaten, he puts her up in a hotel and won't allow her to leave.
Correct. That is again, a definition of kidnapping that people don't think of, like her inability to leave, basically having her restrained, whether it's through the security guard that goes and physically retrieves her or locking her in a hotel and not having her ability to just, I'm deciding that I want to walk out. That if there's someone at the door or, someone's monitoring where she is, the perception that she has that she cannot leave without harm coming to her. That is elements of kidnapping.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Kan du norsk?
If you've heard that sound from Babel before, I bet you do. Babel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
One of the things that keeps coming up for me in this case is many of the elements of control that Diddy exhibits with Jane and also Cassie and also with his assistant. They're extreme versions of things that are being called illegal in this case, like the coercion, the force, the manipulation to get people to do things. In this instance, we're talking about kidnapping, and you're saying, like, if you want to leave a place and somebody won't let you leave, then that's considered kidnapping. And I'm thinking, like, in describing these things, how common they are in relationship dynamics, but we don't always name them as, like, illegal. So if you get into an argument with your partner, but they won't let you leave the house, like they block the exit to a door, they block the exit, for a room in the house, they block the exit to the whole house, they take your keys, something like that. Like, does that fall under the definition of kidnapping?
Yeah, it falls under the definition of kidnapping, and you don't often see it presented in court that way, right? So we see this a lot in the domestic violence space where an incident will happen. I want to leave. I want to go try to call the police, where the phone is taken. Back in the day before cell phones, where we had landlines and they'd rip out the landline cord, right? And block your ability to leave. Yes, that is typically we would call that an unlawful restraint, which goes hand in hand with kidnapping. We underestimate how often that occurs, right? Again, because people think of the traditional version of kidnapping as being some forceful act of taking one from one place to another. But prohibiting someone to leave, controlling their ability to move can also be considered.
What's next on this list? Tampering with a witness. I think I see it. And especially after the indictment comes down, he starts trying to call everybody. And is like, I'm offering you friendship, give me a call. I haven't talked to you.
Yeah.
Things like that. Like, is that just blatant witness tampering, trying to reach out?
Look, you get in trouble, you reach out to your circle of friends to be like, hey, be supportive of me, not witness tampering. So even hand in hand with the bribery, right? You do know that someone has information that can be used against you. How is it that I can get you to not use that information against me? Is that reminding people that they have NDAs? Is that offering to give people money? It can go either way. It doesn't have to be a forceful, don't say anything. It could be softer than that. And I think we've seen it, in a couple of places, particularly with Jane. This stuff is coming out, the videos are coming out, and the hey, are we on the same page? That we go from what feels like a hostile relationship that he has towards her that then sometimes somehow becomes loving. So it's fleshing itself out, but we've seen it, I think, so far, at least in the bribery instance.
And you asked her at some point, God, what do I need to do to make you happy? She said she regrets it. He doesn't say, give me a number, but it's something almost equivalent to that. But it's very clear. He's like, tell me what you want to be happy.
Right.
to make this go away or something like that.
Look, I think he has, at that point, is savvy enough to know that him making the offer. You also have to keep in mind, which I find really interesting, in the testimony of the last couple of days, once the feds are showing up, once the lawsuit is, I'm assuming everybody is recording me. I'm assuming every text message that I have is being screenshot. The fact that there's so many voice notes where somebody could save your voice note is wild to me for someone who's been so careful in the way that he's been able to move.
Well, they had to go pull a lot of that stuff off the phone with forensic experts. But I was also like, why didn't y'all, like, I don't know, destroy the phone? Like, why was it in the house, the possession, something?
Oh, for him, I think there's a point where people feel invincible. I think if you've gotten away with the things that he has allegedly done, and the prosecutor in me does feel compelled to say allegedly until the jury reaches their conclusion, but you're talking decades. You're talking decades. And one of the things that has really stuck with me, why I've been paying attention, is the gravity of what you've been able to do. Like, if you are taking this woman who people see on a regular basis, who is a starlet, if you will, busting her eye, busting her lip, like, and then showing up at the Met Gala, right? And there's a universe of people around you who know it. And whether that's your chief of staff or your head of security or assistants, chefs, like, there's a whole network of people who know and see exactly what you're doing. There's a point where invincibility becomes like your mantra. This man may have believed that it didn't matter if he kept the phones or the oil or the Astroglide or all or whatever at home, because who's coming for me? Who's checking for me? That's what I get from that.
What about forced labor? I was unclear on exactly what the definition of what that was.
I still am looking for that to be fleshed out. I think some of it can be inferred from, the assistants who were working these really ridiculous hours and not being paid, not being paid in the amounts that, so I go to HR because you've got me. You say I'm supposed to be making a certain amount. I'm not making that. And I'm working all of these excessive hours without pay. I think that's one of the ways that we can look at that. Because if people were asking, when the assistants were talking about how much they were making, how many hours per week they were expecting, work or not work, efforts to be able to be compensated for that, right? Someone had to finally sue and say, this man owes me this money. And so I think part of that was looking at the fact that he was not, it's not just being cheap. You are forcing people to work without compensating.
Transportation and inducement to travel for purposes of prostitution. I don't know how anybody could be confused about that one at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty plain. But I think, again, people are watching enough SVU and are thinking, that someone is like snatched up off of the street and now you're going to like prostitute for me. And this is pretty plain, right? He was taking trips across the country and even internationally, Turks and Caicos, and having entertainers come and perform sexual acts for money.
I think people forget that prostitution is illegal.
Yes. I mean, I think most folks know you can go to Vegas and get down, but I think people forget that you are not, in most parts of the country, allowed to do that. And then, there's a lot of conversation around, sex work and legalizing sex work. And the reason that there's conversation about legalizing sex work is because it is illegal.
Yes. Yes. And also, I think I see people say a lot. They're like, oh, Diddy's just out here. He's just like a pimp. And I was like, that's also illegal. Like, yeah. It's also, I think, a form of sex trafficking. You can clear that up for me. But I was like, that's not legal, people.
It's not. It's not legal. And, I think the other thing that I'm hearing is, well, look, he's entitled to his kinks. And if this is how he's choosing to do it, right, what is it about him doing it that takes it to another place? And so that's an interesting line. And I've talked to friends who are lawyers, particularly men, right, who are like, I don't think Diddy's the only person who is paid for people to have sex with them, engage in sex in their presence. What makes this special? And what I'm saying is that it is part of the bigger RICO, part of the bigger piece, part of the arson and the bribery and the other acts, that this too is a predicate offense. So in order to prove these RICOs, it's like multiple criminal activities. This is a criminal activity. Whether you think someone else should be charged with that or not, it's still illegal.
The last one on the list before we circle back to sex trafficking, possession with intent to distribute, which I was like the little Louis Vuitton bag he's carrying everywhere with like, it's like a whole pharmacy of illegal shit.
Yeah. And you've got, I mean, the drug use is prevalent throughout like all of the testimony, right? And how you procure it, right? Who are you giving money to? Who are you instructing to go pick it up and bring it to you or bring it to whomever is going to use it? That is, again, when you say drug trafficking, people are going back to, watching Scarface in 1982 and thinking that it's like sitting waiting for boats to come through. You are engaging in that work when you are paying other people to procure illegal substances for you or for others. And he was paying. It was his money. He was saying what he wanted, what he needed, where he wanted it distributed, who he wanted to have it. It is illegal to possess those drugs. And therefore, it is also illegal to pay people to procure those drugs on your behalf.
To procure them, to possess them, and also distribute them, because he does a lot of distribution.
Correct.
And I was like, I listened to enough Rick Ross like everyone else, but I was like, and still, it is illegal.
I think people think distribution like, a scene in Power where there's like a big warehouse and you pop open the trunk and it's like, all right, here's your rack, here's your, like that is where people get tripped up. Distribution is, all right, I got the ecstasy, give that to Cassie. Give that to Jane. Give that to Mia. That is your that is what you are doing. It doesn't have to be, I think that's where a lot of our folks are just missing the boat. It doesn't have to be some big elaborate like rap lyric. It is, I'm buying these drugs for the purposes of giving them to these people who I know are going to use them when they engage in this activity with me.
Yes. All right, I'm going to circle back to sex trafficking.
Come back.
I think there's an idea of what people think sex trafficking is based on what we see in TV and movies. Russian women are abducted from somewhere and held in a van or a basement. Like, what is actually sex trafficking?
Yeah, so according to the law, the federal law that Diddy is being tried under, it's the recruitment, the harboring, transporting, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting a person for the purpose of commercial sex and doing that by force. And so the layman's way is commercial sex means you are paying for sex from someone else. And doing it by force or coercion mean either threatening physical harm, hurting someone, or coercing by manipulation. And so it can be seen in the evidence that we've seen so far, even most recently, of having one of the escorts or entertainers try to convince Jane to come to one of these freak-offs when propositioned by Diddy and she says she doesn't want to do it, then him using someone else to, in essence, coerce her to come and do it. So it is not necessarily some grave use of force. You could do it by manipulation as well.
What about fraud? Because I was thinking about some of the instances where Jane says, I don't want to have a freak off. I don't want to do a hotel night. And Diddy says, that's fine. Just, get on the plane and come to me. And then when she gets there or on the plane en route, he's like, okay, so I made a set up a freak off. When you get here, like, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, you can consider that frauds in the sense that they made an agreement and then he changes his position. But doing it in enough time for her to now know what the situation is may be different, right? If he says, I'm showing up at the hotel room alone, it's just me and you, she opens the door and someone else is there, that might be a cleaner case versus having a little more time for her to be able to get out of that situation. But I'm sure that they're using the broadest definition of fraud.
There are times when Jane is consenting to freak-offs, like she's arranging them. Like she wants to do one because he's on a trip with someone else. And she's like, well, if you come back, then I'll do a freak-off. And for the first time, I'll do it with two people instead of one person. And then in other times, she's like, I don't want to do this at all. And you've made me have sex with 3 different people on my birthday. And I feel like an animal. I don't feel human. I'm not a porn star.
Both things can be true. The coercion piece, the again, using commercial sex, paying for the entertainers and the like, the coercion, the force, all of that, it goes instant by instant. right? It's criminal act by criminal act. And so in the same way that there's been a lot of conversation about, rape, taking sex by force is rape. If on the next occasion that same woman or person says, I'm consenting to have sex with you, it doesn't mean that the time before that wasn't a rape. And so her consenting to some of these activities are very well, he can argue, are consensual. You still have the argument that in those instances where she said she didn't want it, or where she was fraudulently lured, or where she was coerced, those individual instances can still constitute sex trafficking. So one doesn't cancel out the other, in the same way that if we looked at a straightforward sexual assault, you can do that in one instance and then have consensual sex in another.
What about an instance like she agrees to, I don't know, maybe have sex with one person and then he was like, okay, there's like 2 more people coming?
Again, if you've placed her in a situation, and this is what would be argued to a jury, right? You place her in a situation where now she's not able to leave, that she's already engaged, and you've introduced this other scenario. In her mind, she believes that she can't say no. That if there have been times prior where she has said, I'm tired or hungry, I've tried to get out of this, and the response has been, keep going, no, or you don't feel that you're free to leave, that is an argument that I'm sure that the prosecution will make in an instance such as that.
What about the times, and I think this is one of the things that's tripping people up, Jane repeatedly says, I felt like I was obligated, she definitely says obligated, to do these freak offs because he's paying my rent. They have this contract that she's agreed to, and I'm not quite clear if what she expected she would have to do, if anything, for him to pay her rent for $10,000 a month.
I mean, look, that is going to be a challenge as it relates to Jane and her credibility with the jury, right? So just to reframe, all of this is evidence. What happens when the jury goes back in that room, the judge will give them an instruction to look at the credibility of each witness who testified. So certainly what the defense is going to do is try to paint Jane as someone who knew what she was getting into, right? That's why they mentioned, oh, you have a baby. You get child support for that. That's why they go through, like, what is your job? What did you do for a living without Diddy's money, right? And so what they will try to do is attack her credibility as this is someone who didn't choose to get a traditional job, who, yes, has a child, and said, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, where she says, I gravitate towards providers. I'm certain will come back and be spun around of, is this woman seeking out people like Diddy, who has money, who has power, who has access, who can pay her bills, and this was a choice that she made. That will be an argument that is made. But also another thing can exist at the same time. And again, we see this in the space of domestic violence, where people in an imbalanced relationship and a power imbalance, where this is a man who has the money, who is the provider, who understands that she is then beholden because of that imbalance and hangs that over her. And this doesn't play out just in cases of multimillionaires. We actually see this very often with people who have very little. Where the stakes are really high, where they truly cannot afford to leave their situation without ending up unhoused. And it is because of that they stay into those relationships. And so both can be true, but this will be a real challenge for the prosecution when the defense makes that argument, because that is the argument that they're going to make, is that Jane knows what she was doing. She chose a relationship with this man for those reasons, and she has a history of having done that. That's going to be argued, I guarantee you, to the jury.
I thought the prosecution did a great job, and then we got to cross, and they were going through these pesky text messages where she's, sending him messages, and she's saying how much she loved the time that they had, and like with the freak off, right? She's sending him a message about how he's like the greatest. He does so much for her and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, and she's saying, I just meant like the good parts of it.
Yeah.
Which she could, but I was like, on the surface, those texts sound bad.
Yeah. Oh no, that's going to be a challenge, right? When they put together the case, as we talked about earlier, you go through the indictment and you pick out who's going to prove each piece of this indictment, right? Who is the witness that's going to prove arson? Who's the witness that's going to prove bribery? In this particular case, you have allegations of sex trafficking as it relates to Jane. She is that witness, but she comes with everything that comes with her. And so, yes, those text messages are absolutely relevant. And as a good defense attorney worth his rate will go and say, okay, the prosecution has talked about these 10 where you said that you didn't want this, you didn't like this. Well, let's talk about these 30.
Yeah.
Or when they talk about, a thing that might be an issue is her being upset about someone getting a Chanel bag versus her not getting that bag. Or the language around, I thought if I did, had as much sex with you or did these freak offs, then maybe I would get the trip, right? Maybe I would get the private vacations. That is going to be an issue. Again, doesn't mean that he didn't do the things, but it does mean that they will question Jane's credibility of, is this someone who was doing these things knowingly, willfully engaging in them because she wanted to be a part of a lifestyle versus that she was somehow brainwashed or manipulated or coerced. That is what the argument is going to be.
And I really can't call it.
It is not as clear cut. I mean, I think what's interesting when we look at, the armchair lawyers who are watching this who are like, aha, it is because it's nuance, right? It could absolutely, you can have someone who this is a lifestyle that she is familiar with, having engaged in celebrity relationships before and is accustomed to that, and also fell in love with him and likes material things. Both can be true. It doesn't mean that it's not going to pose a problem for a juror who may be unsympathetic to Jane in a way that maybe they had more sympathy for Cassie. That will be up for the jury, but that's what's going to go back into that room is what is her motivation here? What is her motivation in the relationship and since the relationship has ended for her to take that stand?
I will say that after the evidence came out about him beating her, there was a shift in sympathy toward Jane. Because before, I think people were like, oh, she's a gold digger. She just didn't get the gold she was expecting, but that's what she was out for. And then, she did all these crazy things because she wanted money and she just didn't get her payout. And then after they heard about the beating, they were like, well, we don't know why you was there the whole time, but you were there. But he's still crazy and he still beat you.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges, again, as the prosecutor looking at it from the defense side, is that I think she testified that during the course of the majority of their relationship, there was no physical violence.
No.
That violence happened after the Cassie lawsuit and the video came out. And that she says that, she pushed his head into a counter. What the defense is going to try to argue then is, well, actually, you initiated this violence. And they intimated this. You knew that he was in a vulnerable position with the lawsuit, with the coverage, that engaging in some type of physical altercation with him had him in a vulnerable state, and you put it out there. Again, you can weigh it one way or the other, but the fact that there had not been any physical violence in this relationship with a man where the evidence has shown has engaged in that type of horrific violence caught on tape, but you didn't see that until after you saw someone get a payout. That is, it is, they're gonna, Jane is gonna have a lot of her credibility undermined, even with that instance of physical violence, because there had been none. And she says that she pushed his head. She pushed him into the counter.
He also beat the brakes off of her, in response to that.
He did. This is in no way defending how he responded. But I think what the defense will try to play is we don't know what happened in the room before Cassie ran out at the Intercontinental, right? But what we saw was she was prone, laying on the ground as this man beat, kicked, pulled, did whatever to her, that our eyes are not deceiving us. And he can say, oh, you don't know what happened in the room. We don't. we know what we see. In this instance, it is she initiated physical contact, and he will say, I tried to defend myself. Again, how far was too far? Should he have ever put his hands on her? Absolutely not. But that is for a jury who's looking at two instances with two separate victims, will be a challenge for her. Again, not dispositive, not saying that they will be dismissive of it, but this is a man with a history of domestic violence who had never engaged in domestic violence with her until she pushed his head into a counter.
What about Cassie? Because there was physical abuse involved, I think people are absolutely more sympathetic to her, but I think it's the same thing. And people are like, but was this sex trafficking?
Absolutely.
She wanted the money. She wanted the lifestyle.
Absolutely. And again, the sad part about all of this, which is why, when I mentioned that I was paying attention, I think when people think of sex trafficking, they're also thinking, oh, someone's getting paid. You talked about, people considering Diddy like a pimp, right? Like he wasn't pimping these women out to other people and getting paid for it. In fact, it was the opposite. He's paying for them to engage in these sexual acts. So I think that's also confusing to people because in their minds, pimps make money off of prostitutes. They don't pay to watch prostitutes. But what this was for Diddy was his own personal form of live porn entertainment. He is being entertained by these women engaging in the sex act. And so, yes, he's paying for it, but it is for his pleasure, for his own satisfaction. And so that is why it's still sex trafficking, even though he is not making money off of them. He's using his businesses, he's using his enterprise to pay for this form of entertainment that is illegal for himself. And I think the same thing with Cassie is, people are like, well, she wanted to be a star. She wanted to be, on the same par as like Rihanna or Beyonce or whoever. So she was willing to do what she did. And again, you could make that argument. But I also see this woman who said that she was in love with this man who, much like other victims of domestic violence, can talk about the good parts. There is something that happens with survivors where they are bonded with the person who causes the abuse, that they do have this bond that was testified about with the expert. And it doesn't matter that she wanted to be a singer or entertainer and that he manipulated that. Those feelings are real. And so that's going to be the argument across the board. Like I said, some may have more sympathy for Cassie than they do Jane or Mia, but that will be the through line, that these were all women who wanted to be a part of that lifestyle and were willing to do whatever it took to be there. And it is my hope that the jurors understand the nuances of abuse and the psyche that comes with that and not just be blinded by the celebrity that's attached to this case.
I'm trying to figure out like who the defense is going to put on the stand.
Certainly hope if they were smart, it wouldn't be Diddy.
There's no way. I've watched enough Law and Order. He's definitely not getting on that stand.
But he's so arrogant. I'm not even going. There's a part of me that feels like he's so arrogant. Like he really believes that he is Nino Brown and that he's going to get up there and be, if I'm going down, y'all going down with me.
Nino Brown got killed. He died.
That's what I'm saying. And I don't know what old man gonna be waiting in the hallway to get him, but I think there's an arrogance to this, right? And I think part of the argument is that yes, this man is into kink, right? And he has a kinky lifestyle that most of you don't understand, but he is entitled to his level of kink, and he's also a man of means. And so he can afford to have every fantasy that he has played out. Doesn't mean that he is, a trafficker. He has found these women who are willing to engage in his kink with him. They were all with it until they weren't. And who testifies to that? It would have to be, I imagine, people who saw them together, but who didn't witness any of the abuse. Because you have to keep in mind, whoever testifies for him could not have been a part of any of the things that we just talked about, because you're complicit. Keep in mind, people are signing, all of them, immunity agreements, even our victims. because they were engaging in illegal behavior. And so whoever he brings to testify on his behalf would have to have clean hands. And based on what I've seen, most of the people in that world do not have clean hands.
Would the judge grant them immunity to testify for the defense?
So the burden of proof is on the prosecution. He actually doesn't have to put on a single witness, does not have to do anything. At the conclusion of the case by the U.S. Attorney's Office, they will make a motion, I'm positive, that the state has not proven their burden. A judge will have to decide, based just on the state's case, did you prove every element alleged in the indictment? If so, she says, look, we've got enough to keep going, right? Or enough to go and allow you a defense, or what we call a summary judgment, which is, no, you haven't done it. We need not go any further. And so immunity ties to the one who has the burden. The prosecution, who are the people who can say, oh, you were selling drugs? Oh, I got you. Those are the only people who can say, I'm going to let you slide on that if you help me here. That is not afforded to the defense.
Why everyone has to have clean hands.
Why everyone has to have clean hands.
Ah. If sex trafficking is not proven in this case, does the whole thing fall apart?
No, that's just but one element, right? So when you look at the indictment, again, where you're talking about the enterprise and the activities of the enterprise, again, it goes back to sex trafficking is one, but also bribery, also drug trafficking, also arson. They have a full menu of things that they have put on here. And just because one falls doesn't mean that the others do as well.
Just based on, the things that we kind of know for sure because 3 or 4 people have shored it up, there's definitely a transportation of prostitutes. There's definitely a distribution, a possession and distribution of narcotics. There's bribery, there's arson, there's forced labor, why is this list so long? Oh my gosh. It seems like to me, everything except sex trafficking, like that's the only thing that's kind of could be, could not be, but everything else has been overproven, I would say.
I think that they have made a very meticulous case of laying out the elements for those offenses that you just described. And again, even on the drug piece, I think there was a testimony that I was seeing earlier, but I haven't watched it all the way through about what they found during the raid, finding the envelope that had K and did it test positive for ketamine? Because the other piece is too, just because someone's saying, oh, he gave me drugs, we have to be able to prove, in fact, that those drugs were given, that you were using illegal drugs. And they're meticulously walking through that part. And so, yeah, I think that they have been very thorough in those aspects. We've talked a lot about the sensational sex parts, but the arson piece, like the Cuddy piece, wasn't just about Cuddy. It was like, did your car have a Molotov cocktail in it before you left? No? Okay. Somebody did that. The fire people coming out and saying, yeah, we put out a fire here. And then Capricorn being able to corroborate what she saw. Those are elements that it would be really hard for Diddy to disprove. Now, what he'll argue is, well, you didn't see me do it. My hands weren't on it. But keep in mind, that's what RICO is about. It was designed so that people who sat at the top of these enterprises, who could have, middlemen or, what we call corner boys, if you will, doing the work, and then keep your hands clean. What RICO does is say, we don't actually have to show that your fingerprints were on that car, Mr. Combs. You drove there. You drove there with somebody else. You went into that man's house. You talked in that house. You were there. And the people who were there with you did this thing on your behalf. That's what RICO is. That is what makes it so much different than your standard case, is that it's not just I have to prove that you touched it. What I have to prove here is that you and your enterprise sanctioned this behavior.
Do you think KK is going to testify? I mean, she can't testify for Diddy because what you said about immunity. Do you think she'll testify for the prosecution?
She would absolutely need immunity in order to do so. And again, for our friends who've watched enough of The Wire and other shows, I mean, what they do in order to do that is say, look, we got you, right? If you are the person calling the security guard at the Intercontinental facilitating a bribe, you are likely to, face the consequences of facilitating a bribe. You could be on our side or you could be on the other side. Those are how those conversations are going. You can get with it or you can get got. And so whether it's her or D-Rock or others, right? The people who ran back and grabbed Cassie and brought her back, you may be surprised who you see in the coming weeks testify for the prosecution.
Allegedly, they're supposed to wrap up next week. And I was like, how?
I think you'd be surprised who would come. It will be really hard for him with some of these people who are so close in his orbit to counter what they're saying. So again, back to who does he call? It really depends on who they have in the next couple of days. They may box him in.
If he feels boxed in, are we beyond the point where they could accept a deal? Am I saying the right thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
A plea agreement. Yeah. The time for a plea agreement generally is before the trial starts. And certainly not 3 weeks, 4 weeks into it. He could certainly ask. He could certainly say, listen, I see where this is going. We don't have to do any further. And it would be on the state to choose to do that. And again, the U.S. Attorney's Office may say, oh, no, we're not going to let you deny us this victory that you see is coming. Or could very well say, we'll take it. I think they would be hard pressed to do that, especially having had Cassie, Mia, and Jane already testify. I mean, you would do that in order to save them the humiliation of the cross-examination that they've been put through. You would do that to save them the trauma of reliving what happened to them. They've already done it. So I don't know the incentive that they would have to let him off on a plea at this point.
Part of the consequence of this, because it's RICO, is the matter of his, I guess, $400 million fortune. I think it's still estimated as. How much of the money would they take?
So the prosecution would make an analysis to the court to say how much they believe should be forfeit. So it's subject to forfeiture. Hard to say. Listen, if you think about the fact that Cassie got $20 million,
which I thought was so lowball,
from that one suit, here you go. And the quickness of his response tells you that he did too. It could be a substantial portion of his estate. I couldn't give you a percentage wise because it depends on what the presentation is made by the prosecution, but he could be losing a substantial portion of his estate.
Good for him.
I mean, the problem is he used the businesses to do that. All of these criminal acts were done in furtherance of his work as a CEO. So that's why it's like, yeah, so we get to take what you used in order to do what you've done. So if he'd have just been on his own and not, using employees, not stealing from employees, not doing, then perhaps his assets would have been protected unless he was sued civilly. But because he used the businesses in the commission of his crimes, allegedly, then they will be able to go after those businesses.
What happens to all the civil suits? Because I read something the other day, it was like something like 70, and I was like, this number can't be right, can it?
I feel like 70 feels low to me. I feel like there was a period of time where for like every other day, there was a lawsuit or a group of suits, or hell, it feels like a class action suit against this man. He's still subject to civil liability.
Yeah.
What one might expect is, he files for bankruptcy, especially if he is subject to forfeiture of a substantial portion of his assets. But they can still sue him, whether he has $400 million or 50 cents. They can go for him.
They can go after it. Oh, gosh. He got himself into this, alleged mess, though.
I appreciate the use of the word alleged. I'm not in the business anymore, but I do want people to remember that he is innocent until proven guilty. But yeah, I think there's a broader conversation to be had when this trial is over. And it's the thing that I've been sitting with is the culture that allowed for him to get away with it for so long. That I just remember in the 90s, like the bad boy white party, being in college, thinking that was the place to be. As the Me Too movement took hold a couple years ago, in the absence of Black women, particularly Black women in music, stepping up and feeling like we could tell our stories. Because Diddy's obviously one of the biggest, but this was ubiquitous. Maybe not the trafficking. I think he got a unique set of things that he liked, but the abuse um, is not new.
No, no,
Not new.
no, not at all. I was in New York. I was living in New York. Like I used to I was in magazines. But like I started my career as like a Vibe intern and worked my way up from there. I remember being, 21, I think. I turned 21 like 2 weeks before I moved to New York for grad school. And I got an internship at Vibe, and the editor-in-chief had a birthday party. And this is like my first, big bright-eyed like New York party. And because he's editor-in-chief of Vibe, like all the cover stars show up to the party, Diddy being one of them. I was always around like so many people. The thing with me though, I had a best friend. I need to call this man and thank him. I had a best friend whose boyfriend ran a security company to do the security for most of those parties. Late into the night, when it's creeping to like, past the 2:00 hour, he would come get us and say, it's time for you to go. What? You're not our dad? Like, you sound insane. We thought he was like, the controlling older boyfriend. And come to find out, that man probably saved our lives on so many occasions. Like, we used to hate him, but we would leave because he was paying for the car home. I wasn't trying to pay $50 to go back to Brooklyn.
That's right. And now imagine those who stayed. And like I said, there's a whole conversation. Like I really was. I was thinking about this, thinking about the Freaknik documentary, and everybody talking about how, what's going to come out, what's it going to show, and even the evolution of that. Like this was that era, and I think that Diddy for so long really got to be king, that everybody in the kingdom around him just took this as part of the business. Because I'm telling you, the most heartbreaking part of all of this is me, to your point. If all that alleges is true, this man has been a monster. The more heartbreaking part for me are the people who kept feeding.
Because just off the top of my head, like there's so many people that I knew that worked for Bad Boy that had to be around whose names haven't come up. And I was like, there's so many people involved in keeping all of this stuff under wrap to a degree. Because I remember hearing stories about Cassie like 2010 at the latest. I was still working at Essence. But yeah, I heard stories about Cassie like way back then. I didn't know it was to the extent. I knew there were instances where she had been assaulted by him, but I didn't know it was, what came out in this trial. The stuff about Kim Porter, even immediately when she passed, like, behind the scenes, people were like, was it pneumonia or was it, because he be,
And playing in people's faces. So there's that. And then there's him on Ellen, right? Or changing his name to Love, or all the other silly shit he was doing.
I'm glad you said that about the Ellen thing. Because he does that interview with Ellen and she's like, oh, like, what are you up all night doing? And he's like, making love. I like to make a lot of love. I kind of think of that same thing with like Bill Cosby. Like, you've been drugging women and you're doing bits about Spanish Fly in your act. Like, what?
In our faces. That's what I'm saying. The man has been playing in our faces from the beginning. From the beginning. Like, that's that, again, where I think the sense of invincibility comes from him. Is that you didn't have all the details, right? We didn't know about the Punisher by name, but the man was telling you, I throw these wild ass parties at a certain point of the night. Phones are dropped in bags, doors are closed, and shit is happening. He's never not said that. And I think you're going to hear that in the defense closing. You're going to hear in the defense closing that this man has always told people who he is and what he does. And therefore, these women who came to be a part of his world knew it just like all the rest of us.
That's crazy. Oh, someone pointed out to me the other day that just as recently as, he did this song called Act Bad with City Girls. And the video is basically a bunch of freak-offs.
Listen.
Somebody said it in my comments or another comment section, and I was like, this can't be fucking true. But let me just Google it real quick. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
He hasn't been hiding.
No.
I'm telling you, we'll circle back after closing. That's going to be the argument. This is who this man has been. And these women chose, knowing who he was, to be a part of this lifestyle. And even as Jane talked about the lifestyle, when they asked her, well, how did they know that you knew how to find an entertainer? And it was, they might have just assumed I was a part of the lifestyle. If anything, the defense is going to put the lifestyle on trial.
From something you said earlier, because you were mentioning if Jane is, who the internet believes her to be, she's got this guy who's a famous rapper who's her child's father, and then she's dating Diddy, and then she ends up, that's why they were playing up that private jet with the other rappers so much. Oh, I didn't even make that connect. See, this is why I count on you. This is where you shine. You're like, because I do this for a living.
This is what I do. This is what I do. You on a private jet without Diddy, going to a hotel in Vegas with someone that you describe as an icon, a legend, who says to you, oh, I've been wanting to blank you. And so that's the argument, that she is one of these women who, like, that is her universe. Those are her people. This is what she does.
Of all the things to do in Vegas, and there are many, like you end up at another freak off, like, ma'am.
At another freak off where you expose your breasts.
That part. And I was like, Jane.
Yeah.
There's something about this woman that I genuinely want her to be okay, though.
Absolutely. And this is not, and I've seen the comments, it's not victim shaming. I'm not doing it. I'm talking strictly as a litigator, as a former prosecutor, top prosecutor who's prosecuted sex offenders. I know that the defense is looking at ways to undermine her credibility. Mm-hmm. And those are things that will be called into question. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, Jane. We were talking on Facebook and we were like, I hope Jane writes a book. Oh, let me ask you this before we get to that. Yeah. What did you make about, because it blew my mind. Like, I don't even know. I was trying to process it. Jane leaves the stand and then she hugs the attorney. I was like, girl, what?
It hugs everybody. Like, everybody. Prosecution and defense, I read.
Yeah. What? Why? What is she doing?
I will tell you, in my 20 years of being a prosecutor, I've never seen anything like that. I've never heard or seen anything like that. So you asking the wrong one. I don't know. All I can imagine is as traumatic and horrible as it would be to have your sex life on display in front of a packed courtroom and on TMZ and the Shade Room and the blogs, that your relief of getting it over overcame her. I've never seen anything.
Maybe she just needed a hug.
I mean,
she needs a lot of things.
Yeah, not the least of which I also thought was ironic, was, Diddy and her talking about getting therapy.
Oh, God. Please.
Which I thought was go. Like, this isn't real. But it is certainly my hope for all of them involved, all of the victims involved, that they get some therapy to.
I think Jane and that hug, because it just threw everyone who read it like for a loop. Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And people want to like help her or know more about her. Like, what is her background? What is her story? If you don't have money, sis, like you could pull an old school Corinne Steffens and you could write the book. The book would be a bestseller for sure.
Yeah.
Because we want to understand, Jane. We want to understand. And we don't understand.
And you can help her negotiate the advance.
Girl.
Make sure she finally gets what she deserves.
Look, I'll help her write the book.
Look. She could finally get, the what she deserves. And then, like I said, that just kept coming through, was this woman who felt so undervalued. And, I do believe her when she says that she was using the freak offs as her leverage. That, oh, maybe you're not doing that with, Gina, or you're not doing that with the young, like, this is my power and I'm not being given the respect that I'm trying to get with it, and using it. And there is a story to be told about that too, of how she gets to the point in her life where she says that her boundaries are so obliterated.
Yeah.
Looking for affirmation from this man. I believe that. It couldn't have been about the money. It could not.
She wasn't making enough money.
It wasn't enough. She could cover that with 3 months of OnlyFans. It wasn't that. She was looking for more. And that kept tugging at me. Like, my heart really was going out to Jane. Because she's not 18, 19. She's pushing closer to 40.
Mm-hmm.
And still searching for a level of affirmation and love in her life that would allow for her to ask herself in front of a crowded room, why did I compromise myself so badly?
Yeah. Yeah, that was heartbreaking, reading that part. That was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that you've observed about the case or discussions about the case online, the internet lawyers that you want to bring to the attention that I haven't picked up on, that you as a, professional are like, people, what are y'all talking about?
No, I think you've done a great job of yelling out RICO at the right moment.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think it is incredibly helpful to come to the end of the sentence and be like, RICO, because I think for the people at home watching, it feels complicated, right? I will say some of the conversations that I've been having with professional men, lawyers, who really are of the belief like, yeah, okay, but why are you all going after him now? And I think that will also be part of the defense, right? Okay, these things would, happen to Cassie in 2012. You're talking 13 years ago. You're talking a significant amount of time ago. Again, this man's playing in our faces. He's telling us this is who he is. He's on Ellen saying who he is. Why now? And that's not an illegitimate question to ask. But it is, I think, a question that is where I'm seeing a division among even those of us who do this work, who are wondering about the motivation to pursue this case at this time.
It's not because of Cassie's lawsuit? Just put it all out there?
I would imagine that's what it was. Same scenario. I had to answer these same questions when we indicted R. Kelly back in 2019. He'd already been tried. The instance of the child pornography happened way back, in the early 2000s.
Right before Chocolate Factory.
We had the same question. So I say this with a level of authority that I was challenged. Oh, you saw surviving R. Kelly, and now all of a sudden there's something to do. The truth of the matter was, yes. That's right. I saw this documentary that laid out the stories of these potential victims that I believe merited investigation into. Because if this person was a predator, just because time had elapsed doesn't mean that he wasn't still harmful to people. Doesn't mean that he wasn't still doing anything. And like I said about Diddy, wasn't emboldened by the first victory, which makes you that much more willing to go further than you ever gone before. And so I think that is a legitimate question. And I think the U.S. Attorney's Office will say, much like they did, we brought charges in R. Kelly, so did the U.S. Attorney's Office in Illinois and New York. It doesn't matter when the incident occurred. We're within our statute of limitations, and we cannot allow someone to engage in such egregious behavior not be held accountable, regardless of how long ago the incident happened.
I mean, well, Diddy knew that he was under investigation, had gone to New York to turn himself into the feds, and still had all the supplies for a freak-off in the hotel room.
The argument's going to be the man likes to have kinky sex. He doesn't think he's engaging in criminal activity. He thinks he's doing the thing that gets him where he needs to get off. That's the argument's going to be, is that he doesn't view this as criminal activity. He doesn't view this as sex trafficking. The argument's going to be he's paying money. These are willful participants. The Punisher, Anton, all of them, like they're Paul.
It's still illegal. Prostitution is not legal.
I know, but he's going to say, find me the CEO of X corporation who doesn't have an escort. It's the patriarchal, not to get on my soapbox, but this, that there is a culture that has existed that even with the illegality of it all, that it is understood that type of behavior is happening. And what he will argue is that he is being singled out for doing that which others have done over the course of history because of who he is. That's the argument.
That whole bring a black man down.
Listen.
He was about to buy something expensive.
Tubi.
But something. It's like, sir, you had it all. You fucking fumbled it.
It's never enough. It's never enough.
I love this lady. When she said Diddy was about to buy Tubi, it took everything in me not to lose it. Oh my gosh. All right. Thanks for listening to yet another bonus episode of Ratchet and Respectable. We'll be back with, I think, a non-Diddy episode on Wednesday. Jalen Hurts did a second wedding. They did the private wedding, then they did the public wedding. I heard on the radio, I was driving home from the gym, I heard that they rented out the entire 4 seasons in Napa Valley for their wedding. It was a big wedding weekend. There were 3 big weddings on my timeline this weekend, 2 of them in France. More congratulations to Jalen and his beautiful bride. We are very excited to welcome her into the family because Jalen Hurts is totally family. We'll be back with a regular episode of Ratchet and Respectable as planned on Wednesday. Talk soon. Bye.